Alright, so in this video, we'll take a look at how to use the FlySky i6X radio transmitter using the OpenTX firmware. So we will cover how to bind the receiver and set up a model and go through some other settings as well. And because this will be a long video, I'll try my best to keep things as simple as possible so that it's easy to understand. So stay tuned and I hope you guys find this video helpful. So with OpenTX on this radio, the UI is a bit different and the functions of each button are also a bit different. So for example, if you hold the OK button, you enter the model list. So you can set up your models over here and this is where you can see those models. Similarly, if you hold the bind key, you enter the radio setup menu. And if you press the up or the down key, you can navigate between the home screen and you can also scroll through the settings option. So the very first setting that we'll take a look at when setting up a model is, we'll go to the radio setup. So I'll hold the bind key and under the first page of the radio setup, you can set your battery range. Then there's option to adjust the sound. Currently the firmware does not support sound, so this will be available in the future updates. So you can adjust the contrast of the display from here. You can also adjust the alarm for low battery indication. You can also set the duration of the backlight display. We do have the option for brightness, but that makes no difference for this radio transmitter. And if we scroll all the way down, you will see that we have the option to set the channel order and the mode for the radio transmitter. So by default, this is set to RETA and the mode is set to 2. But I will change this to AETR because that's what Betaflight uses and I have configured my flight controller using Betaflight. So to edit this, I'll click the OK button and I'll scroll through the options using the up button. So we have the option of AETR. So I'll click OK to select that. And the stick mode is set to 2. So that's what I want for my FPV quad. So to go to the next page, you can click the cancel button. So that way the main page is highlighted. And then you can press the bind key to navigate to the next page. So the second page in the radio setup is the global functions. Then you have the trainer mode. Then you have the version screen where you can check what version of OpenTX you have. So currently we have version 2.3.0. And if you want to factory reset your radio, you can press and hold the OK button. And that way you can reset the radio. Then the next page is switches. So here you can check all your switches and see if they're working. Then we have the analog page where you can check your gimbals and ports. And in the hardware page, you can either name the sticks or if you want, you can disable the ports or adjust them. And similarly for switches, you can set that to toggle or select it to none. And this is the calibration screen. So this is the main part of the radio setup. So always make sure to calibrate your gimbals and your ports before setting up a model so that when you want to operate your model, you can get the correct feedback from the gimbals. So to calibrate your gimbals, make sure you are in the calibration screen and press the OK button to start. And then center your gimbals and your ports. So you can use the guide markings to center your left stick and even the ports. And once you do that, click on the OK button and then move the gimbals all around to set the endpoints. And similarly, move the pods very slowly in both the directions and then press OK to continue. So now the gimbals and the pods are calibrated. Now the VRB or the pod 2 is also assigned to scroll through the pages. So if I move the pod 2, you can see that we can switch between the pages. Currently there is no option to disable that in the software, but just to let you guys know that you have the option to use the pod to scroll through. So that's pretty much what you'd like to set in the radio setup. Now we can go ahead and create a new model. So to do that, press the OK button, and by default there is a model assigned to the first number. I would suggest you create a new model. That's because if you select the first model and use that to set up your model, you'll notice that the channel order in the input screen and the mixer screen is set to RETA. If you have changed the channel order in the radio setup, then you'll have to create a new model and then set that up. Otherwise, you'll have to edit the channels over here to set the correct order. So that's why I suggest you create a new model and delete the first model that was set by default. So if you want, you can move the model to the first number. So to enter the model setup, click on the bind key and you will go to the second page of the setup screen. So if you press the down key, you can scroll through the options. So firstly, you can name your model over here. So I'll name this to FPV drone. And if you want to use capital letters, simply select your letter and press the bind key to make it bold. If you want, you can enable the timers. So you have the option to set up to 3 timers. If you want to reverse the throttle, you can do that from here. And if you want to change the throttle source to something else, you can do that as well. And then we have the option of internal RF module. So this is where you can bind your receiver and select the protocol. So you can see that the mode is set to FS2A, which is frequency hopping version 2 from FlySky. So you can either disable the internal module or set that to FS2A. Then you have the option to select the subtype. So you have PPM iBus, PWM S-Bus and PPM S-Bus. I'll set this to PPM S-Bus. If you want, you can change the servo frequency. Then you have the option of setting up the channel range. So if you want, you can increase this. To select the later half, click on the bind button and then you can increase or decrease the higher range. So here there's a bug where you can only decrease this, but if you press the up button, the numbers don't go higher. So what you can do is, you can use the port 1 to increase the number or even decrease it, and then press the down key to lower the range. Then in the RX number, you can set the receiver number for the model. So always make sure you select a fresh receiver number for every model. So currently I'm on the first model and I'll set the receiver number to 0. Then you have the option to bind. So from here you can bind your receiver. So let's do that. So I'll bind my X6B receiver, which I'm using for my FPV quad, and I'm using the S-bus port on the receiver. And I can power up my receiver using the flight controller by plugging in a USB cable, but you may have to use a battery for that. And if you do, make sure to remove your propellers. So I'll hold the bind button on my receiver and plug in the USB cable. So that way the receiver can enter the binding mode, and you can see that the LED is blinking. So to bind, I'll make sure that the bind option is highlighted and I'll press the OK button. And you can see that the receiver LED is stable. So this indicates that the binding is successful. And if I select the RNG, which is the range, you can see that we have a RSSI reading of 99. So that's how you bind your transmitter to the receiver. So make sure to select the right protocol and decide the RX number to which you'd like to bind the receiver. Then the next option is of failsafe. So by default, this is selected to not set. If you want, you can change this to hold, custom, no pulses, or receiver. So if your receiver has a failsafe button, you can use that by selecting the receiver option for the failsafe. But I'll be using custom, and I'll get back to this later on once I have configured the drone in Betaflight. So that way I have the gimbals centered to 1500 microseconds, and I've also assigned the aux channels. So we'll get back to the failsafe feature later on. And you also have the option to use an external RF module. So if you have one, you can connect that to the DSC port. So to enable the external RF module, make sure that you have selected the mode and click on the OK button and press the up button. So that way the protocol is set to PPM. Most RF modules accept PPM input, so you have that option over here. Similarly, you can set the channel range over here, and you can also adjust the PPM frame, but I won't be using this, so I'll disable it. Then the next page is flight modes. Mostly you won't use this. Then you have the input screen, and here you can see that the channel order is set to what we have selected in the radio setup. So the first one is set to aileron, the second is elevator, the third is throttle, and the fourth is rudder. Then next up is the mixer screen. So make sure whatever inputs or channels you want to use for your model, you have them set up in the mixer screen, because through the mixer option the channels are activated. So for example, let's say if I want to add the arming switch on channel 5, then I'll select channel 5 and I'll edit the source. So I'll use switch A for channel 5 to assign it for arming the quad. So if I simply toggle the switch, it automatically gets detected over here, and you can see that on the screen. So this way you can assign switches for other channels as well. If you want, you can adjust the weight, the offset. So I'll get back to the mixer screen when I'm setting up the quad in Betaflight. So let's take a look at the next page. So here we have the output screen. So if you want to adjust the subtrim, you can do that from here. And to do that, hold the OK button on the channel and select edit. So let's edit this. So I'll adjust the center value for the gimbals using the subtrim feature when I'm using Betaflight. If you want, you can set the minimum and max range for the channel. Then if you want to reverse the direction, you can do that from here. So if you click on OK, you'll see that the direction is inverted. By default, the PPM center is set to 1500 microseconds. So this is the curve page. So if you want, you can add a curve and edit that, and then assign to a particular channel in the mixer screen. Then you have the logical switches. Then you have the option to set up special functions. So you can use the aux switch and enable functions like the trainer mode. And then we have the telemetry screen. So to get telemetry from the receiver, you'll have to make sure that your receiver is bound, and under the telemetry page, you'll have to select discover new sensors. So click OK on that. and right away you can see that we have about 7 sensors that are discovered. So we have the link quality, the RSSI, the signal to noise ratio, and various other options. So once you have acquired all the sensors, you can click on stop discovery, and similarly if you want to add a new sensor, you can do that from here. So you can name that and select what type of sensor that is. And if you want to delete all the sensors, you can do that as well. Then next we have the display page. So here you can set up to 4 screens in which you can add telemetry options or channel values, and you can decide if you want to view them as numbers or bars. So for example, if I set up the first screen by adding the battery followed by RSSI, and similarly for screen 2, I've set up the gimbals so that I can see the values in the bar format. And to see the screens that we just set up, you'll have to hold the down button, and you can see that we have the battery, the link quality, the RSSI, and signal to noise ratio. And to view the next screen, press the down button, and here you can see the channels I've set for the screen 2. So you can add 2 more screens and use that. And if you press the OK button once, you can reset the timers or the telemetry. You can view the stats. So how long since we have the radio turned on, the throttle timer, and the other timers if you have enabled those. If you want to reset the session time, simply hold the OK button and it will go back to 0. So now I'll launch Betaflight to assign the arm switch and flight modes, and also to center the gimbals. Alright, so I've launched Betaflight, and the first thing I'll do is I'll enable the receiver in the ports tab. And because I'm using S-Bus, I'll have to enable serial RX. And after that, I'll go to the configuration tab, and in the receiver section, I'll select serial based receiver and select S-Bus. So now if I go to the receiver tab, and if I move the gimbals on the radio transmitter, you can see that the channel values are moving as well. Now if you see the preview, you can see that the drone is moving on its own, even though I'm not giving any stick input. And that's because the channel values for the roll, pitch, yaw are not centered. So the stick center value is set to 1500 microseconds by default in Betaflight. If you want, you can change that, but it's best to adjust the subtrims in your radio transmitter. And to do that, I'll go to the model page, and I'll go to the output screen, and I'll set the subtrim for every channel until the value is set to 1500 microseconds in Betaflight. So let's edit the channel 1 first. So at about minus 3.6, the value for roll in Betaflight is set to 1500. Similarly for channel 2, at about minus 3.3, the value for pitch is at 1500 microseconds. Channel 3 is for throttle, so you don't have to adjust the subtrim for that. And the last for channel 4. So at about minus 4.1 in channel 4, the value for yaw in Betaflight is set to 1500. And now if we take a look at the preview section, you'll see that the drone is absolutely stable and it's not moving on its own. And if I give any stick input, you'll see that the drone is moving. So it's very important to adjust the subtrim values so that you center the channel values in Betaflight so that your drone does not drift and you can get better control. And now I'll go back to the mixer page and add a few switches for assigning the flight modes, and for channel 6 I'll use the switch C, which is a 3-position switch. So if I move the switch C, you can see that aux2 in Betaflight has a channel value that's moving up and down. And previously I had already assigned switch A. So you can see that in Betaflight aux1 is channel 5. And similarly for channel 7 in the radio transmitter, I'll assign switch D. And if I need, I'll even assign the switch B for something else. So in total I'm using 8 channels, and if I move all the switches down, you can see in Betaflight all the auxiliary channels are working properly. So now let's go to the mode section in Betaflight to assign the arm switch and the flight modes. So I'll click on add range, and I've set the channel selection to auto. So that way if I flick a switch on the radio transmitter, you'll see that automatically aux1 is selected because switch A is channel 5, which is aux1 in Betaflight. So if I flick the switch A downwards, I want the quad to arm. So similarly, I'll set up the angle mode. So I'll click on add range, and to set up the flight modes, I use the switch C, which is a 3-position switch, and automatically aux2 is selected over here. If I want, I can add horizon as well, and again I'll use the switch C for that, but in the middle position. And if I want, I can even add acro trainer, and for that I use switch T. So when I have the switch C all the way down, I'm in angle mode. When I have the switch C in center position, I'm using horizon mode. And if I set the switch C all the way up, I'm in the rate mode or the acro mode because I haven't assigned any flight modes in Betaflight. So by default that means the quad is assigned to rate or acro mode. And if I toggle switch D, then acro trainer is activated. So this is how I set up flight modes for my FPV quad. So now that I've set up the subtrims and I've assigned the aux channels for arming and flight modes, we can now go ahead and set up the failsafe. So I'll go to the model setup, and where it says failsafe, you can set this to hold, disable the failsafe, or set it to no pulses, or set it to receiver if your receiver has a failsafe button on it. I would recommend you set this to custom, and to make changes, press the bind key so that you highlight the set option and click on OK. So here you can see all the channels and the default channel value, which is at 1500. If you want to edit this, you can double click on the OK button and then hold it to change to other options. So you can set this to hold or select none, or revert back to 1500, which is the default value. And if I move the gimbals, you can see that it's reflected over here. So let's say during failsafe you want your quad to hover. So for that you will need the throttle. So channel 3 is set for throttle, and if I want to set a certain value for this, I would simply set the throttle position to where I would like, and I'll hold the OK button. So that way the value is set to whatever the stick position is at. So let's say in this case, if the signal is lost, the throttle will automatically switch to this channel value and the drone will hover, or the motors will continue to spin depending on this channel value. If you want to reset this, double click on the OK button and then change it. So similarly, you can assign the failsafe value for other channels as well. If you select any other option for the failsafe, then in that case, your model will continue to operate on the last signal it received. So I would recommend you use the custom feature or use the receiver option if your receiver has a failsafe button on it. Otherwise, it's best to use the custom option. And if you want to set your failsafe directly on the basis of the Subtrim for your gimbals and aux channels, then what you can do is you can go to the failsafe feature and select the set option and simply hold the OK button. And you can see that automatically all the channel values are set to whatever position they were. So if you want, you can do that as well. So you can set up the custom failsafe by simply holding the OK button, and automatically the values for the channels and the aux switches will be assigned. And because I've used the subtrims to center the values in Betaflight, I'll set the failsafe for the first 4 channels on the basis of the subtrim settings. So on channel 1, even if I don't apply any input, and if I hold the OK button, you'll see that the value changes, and that's because I've set it up using the subtrim feature in the output screen. So similarly for channel 2 as well, I'll hold the OK button and set that, followed by for channel 3 and channel 4. So whenever you're trying to set up the failsafe function, I would suggest you spend some time and go through all the options so that you can get a better understanding of how this works. So now I can test the quad and see how it responds. But before I do that, let me just quickly set up another model using my RC car so that we can very briefly go through all the steps that we just covered. So I'll go to the model settings and create a new model. And whenever you create a new model, if you want to bind the receiver, you'll first have to turn off your radio transmitter and then turn on. And in the radio setup, I'll make sure that the mode is set to what I want. Now for RC car, I use mode 4. So I'll set that to number 4. So I'll go back to the model settings and I'll select the receiver number to 1. The previous receiver in my FPV quad was assigned to number 0. This particular receiver only supports up to 10 channels, and I'll be using PPM or PWM. So I'll set the maximum channel number to 10 and the servo frequency is set to 0. I'll set that to 50, which is default. And the subtype I'll leave to PWM because the ESC in my RC car supports PWM. So now I can bind the receiver. So here I'm using the FSIA10B receiver, and to bind this I simply have to plug in the bind adapter on the first port and then power it up. So the LED is blinking, and now if I click OK on bind option, the binding is successful. And I'll set the failsafe to custom as well. So that way if I turn off the transmitter. The model goes back to center. So whenever you want to switch between the model, first make sure that you have turned off your receiver or the model, and then in the radio transmitter, select the right model you want to use, and then power off the radio, and then turn on. So you can see that the binding between model 1 and the receiver is also successful. So whenever you want to switch between the models, always make sure to switch off your existing model, then select the right model in the radio transmitter, then turn off your radio, and then turn on and power your other models. So that way the binding is successful and you can operate your model. And once again, a big thanks to Mr. Mariano for continuing to develop the OpenTX firmware for the FlySky i6X radio transmitter. Without him, this wouldn't have been possible, and I'm truly glad and happy to have the option of OpenTX on the FlySky radio, because that makes this radio the most affordable option to use the OpenTX firmware. So this was just a basic walkthrough with the OpenTX on the FlySky FSI6X radio transmitter. We still haven't had a look at the global variables, logical switches, and the curves option. So I still have to take a look at that, and once I do that, I'll make a video on that too. So I hope you guys found this video helpful, and if you did, please make sure to like it, and if you have any questions, you can comment them below.